The morning began with a scream that tore through the walls of my house. I had just opened the attic window to let in the faint ocean air when Sarah's voice rose from the kitchen. Sharp and electric. I heard Adrian's hurried steps, the scrape of a chair, then laughter that turned almost hysterical. I came halfway down the stairs and saw them together, my daughter clutching a slip of paper, her husband's arm wrapped around her shoulders. His phone glowed in his hand as he shouted, 87 million. We actually won. His voice shook with disbelief. But Sarah's eyes were already glittering with triumph, not wonder. She turned toward me, her smile curdling. Well, you can finally stop hanging around this place like a shadow. We don't need charity anymore. Go die in a nursing home. For a moment, the words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. 10 years of feeding them, paying bills, and raising their daughter without complaint. And this was the thanks. I steadied myself on the rail, watching them both so sure of their sudden fortune, so certain the world had turned in their favor. Adrian kissed Sarah's temple, already spinning out promises of new cars and houses. My eyes slipped to the ticket trembling in her hand, the faint pen strokes visible even at a distance. I knew every loop of that ink because I had written it. Signing the back of each ticket had been a ritual, as ordinary as brushing my teeth. My late husband had taught me to do it decades ago. Always put your name down. Clara, he had said, because people change when money is involved. I let the silence stretch, then answered softly, Did you read the name on the ticket? And the house went still, carrying me back to the years that had led to this moment. The memory of that morning carried me back to the day I lost my husband. It was a late summer afternoon at Surfer's Point when the tide turned rougher than expected. Roberto had been a strong swimmer, but the rip current dragged him out fast, and by the time lifeguards pulled him in, the life we had built together had already gone under. I buried him in the hillside cemetery overlooking Ventura, and for the first time in 40 years, I walked home alone. Not long after, Sarah and Adrian appeared at my door with suitcases and excuses. Their apartment off Main Street had slipped beyond their reach. Rent raised again. Jobs lost in quick succession, just for a few weeks. Mom, Sarah promised. Standing in the doorway with tears in her eyes, I didn't hesitate. I opened my house, the same way I had always opened my purse, and gave them the guest room downstairs. Weeks became months. Adrian found part-time work at a dealership in Thousand Oaks, but his commissions never lasted. Sarah cycled through office jobs she claimed were beneath her, always dreaming of something better. My pension covered the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, even the car insurance they'd forgotten to pay. When bills arrived, I quietly wrote the checks, telling myself it was family duty, not burden. Eventually, my bookshelves were packed into boxes and stored in the garage to make space for their home office. When Lena was born, the guest room became the nursery, and I was moved upstairs into the attic, told it would be quieter for me there. The slanted ceiling pressed close. The single window faced only the neighbor's wall, but I agreed without protest. It was easier to stay silent. Silence kept peace at the dinner table, kept Adrian's temper calm, kept Sarah from lashing out with words that cut deeper than she knew. I convinced myself that usefulness was love, that my presence mattered only in how much I could provide. 10 years passed that way, each season folding over the next, until generosity no longer felt like choice but obligation. And I became the shadow they believed I was. Life in the attic settled into a rhythm that looked like family from the outside, but felt like servitude inside. Meals were the clearest reminder. I cooked every evening pots of beans, roasted chicken, casseroles that stretched my pension check, and then I watched as Sarah and Adrian filled their plates first, heaping food onto Lena's tray, before I was invited to eat whatever scraps remained. Sometimes it was enough, sometimes it wasn't. But the real hunger was the silence I kept. My books, once lined neatly in the living room where Roberto and I used to read in companionable quiet, had long since been pushed into boxes. I stacked them in the garage, and over time they grew dusty, their spines curling in the damp coastal air. It wasn't just paper and ink, it was memory, conversation, a life I no longer had. When company came by, Sarah liked to reframe the story. "My mom is staying with us," she would say, as though I were a boarder, not the one holding the roof steady. Once, at a barbecue in the backyard, she even called me our permanent guest, laughing as though it were a joke, and the neighbors chuckled politely. I smiled too, swallowing the burn in my chest because to protest would be to invite pity, and pity felt worse than invisibility. Adrian's presence carried its own shadow. He leased a car from Thousand Oaks, something sleek and loud, insisting it was necessary for his sales job. The payments stacked against the credit cards he never seemed to pay off. And when collection calls came, I was the one writing checks to keep the house phone from ringing through the night. He shrugged it off as investment, a step toward a brighter future that always shimmered just out of reach. I told myself it was better to bend than to break, better to live in a cramped attic and be called a guest than to push my daughter away entirely. Each compromise felt small enough on its own. One meal skipped, one bill paid, one insult ignored, but together they carved something hollow in me. And yet, even hollowness has its breaking point. And mine came on the morning of Lena's birthday. Lena's 10th birthday came with the kind of anticipation that should have been sweet. She had been talking for months about a bicycle she'd seen in the shop window on Thompson Boulevard, a sky blue frame with white handles and a little silver bell. Each time we passed it on our walks home from school, her eyes lit up as though the world itself was contained in those wheels. I had listened quietly, nodding, and each time I resolved more firmly to make it hers. $200 was no small amount for me. It meant skipping lunches at the library for weeks before I retired, tucking away coins and small bills, watching them slowly gather in an envelope hidden in my dresser. Every time I set aside another 5 or 10, I thought of Roberto, who used to say that gifts are never about price but about what they say. You are seen, you are remembered. On the morning of her birthday, I woke early, baked a cake, and set balloons around the kitchen table. The bicycle waited in the garage, wrapped in gold paper I had bought at the dollar store. Lena's face lit up when she saw the decorations, and her excitement was so pure that I nearly cried. She ran into my arms, whispering, "Grandma, is it today?" I kissed her hair and told her yes. Today was the day, but Sarah's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She swept into the kitchen, eyes sharp, lips tight. "Mom, we talked about this," she said, staring at the wrapped shape in the garage. "Lena doesn't need an expensive gift. She needs to learn responsibility." I tried to reason gently. "She's 10. Sarah, it's a milestone. She's been dreaming about this." Sarah crossed her arms. "And that's exactly why she shouldn't get it. Life isn't about getting everything you want. You're teaching her to expect too much." Her words were loud enough for Lena to hear, and I saw the child's eyes dim. Adrian entered then, coffee in hand, already irritated. "What's going on?" "She bought Lena that bike," Sarah said, pointing toward the garage. "I told her not to." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Mom, maybe it's not the best idea. We can't have her thinking money grows on trees." I looked at the envelope of receipts, at the careful way I had counted every cent. My voice shook, but I said nothing more. Lena was sent upstairs. Together, they wheeled the gift back into my car, and I drove it to the shop to return it. The clerk raised his eyebrows, but I forced a smile and handed over the bike that should have been hers. That evening, after the house grew quiet, I walked down Seaward Avenue to the little market near the corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and I stood in front of the lottery machine, staring at the slip of paper. The numbers came to me as they always had birth dates of my husband, my daughter, my granddaughter, and me. For 20 years I had played them, sometimes winning a few dollars, mostly losing, but always writing them down. When the clerk handed me the ticket, I pulled a pen from my purse and signed my name across the back in looping script. It was habit. But more than that, it was declaration. My name meant that, whatever else the world might take from me, this was mine. I folded the ticket carefully, slid it into my wallet, and when I got home, I stapled the receipt into the folder where I kept important documents. Mr. Neary had told me years ago, paper trails matter. Ione. Someday you may need proof. I sat at the small desk in my attic room, the sounds of Sarah's laughter drifting up from below as she celebrated Lena's birthday without the gift her daughter had dreamed of. I rested my hand on that folder, feeling the thin weight of the paper inside, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that belonged only to me. Downstairs, I heard the creak of the floorboards and the muffled arguments of a household already spending what it had not earned, and I knew the numbers I had chosen would soon test everything we were. The day after Lena's birthday began with chaos below my attic room. I heard Sarah's shriek again, but this time it was joy, not anger. By the time I reached the landing, Adrian was waving the ticket in one hand and his phone in the other, shouting that they had matched every number. They clung to each other, laughing and crying, voices tumbling over promises of everything they would finally buy. Sarah was already talking about a house in Oyai, nestled in the hills, where no one would question her taste or status. Adrian pulled up photos of cars parked along Marina Park, pointing to one SUV after another, talking about road trips, about vacations in Hawaii, about leaving behind the smallness of our street. I leaned against the rail, unseen for a moment, and watched the scene unfold as though it belonged to strangers. Sarah held the ticket in trembling hands, whispering that fate had finally smiled. Adrian kissed her and repeated that it was their ticket, the one they had found sitting on the kitchen table. Not once did either of them mention me. My fingers tightened around the phone in my pocket. Quietly, I took it out, angled it toward the slip of paper, and snapped a photograph of the back where my name curved in black ink. I tucked the phone away before they noticed. They spoke with a speed born of greed, planning how to stage the house for a realtor, what colors to paint Lena's new room in the mansion they hadn't bought yet, what friends they would stop speaking to once they had moved up. I listened without a word, my silence stronger than any protest. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to keep the family afloat. I was the one holding the quiet truth, waiting to see how far their illusions would carry them before reality dragged them back. And reality came the very next morning, in the form of a suitcase sliding across the floor. By midday the following day, the sound of drawers slamming shook the house. I stepped out of the attic just in time to see Sarah dragging a suitcase down the hallway. My clothes, folded without care, spilled out as she yanked it open to stuff in more. Without looking up, she said, "It's time you packed. We don't need this arrangement anymore." I asked what arrangement she meant, though I already knew. She didn't bother answering. Instead, she hauled the suitcase to the stairwell and kicked it down the last few steps. The thud echoed like a verdict. When I followed her outside, the yard had already become a stage. My framed photographs of Roberto and Lena were scattered across the lawn. Glass cracked, faces caught in sunlight while neighbors peered over fences. Sarah lifted another box and hurled it from the second-story window, papers scattering like birds across Hemlock Street. I looked at Adrian, standing on the porch with his hands buried deep in his pockets. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground. He didn't lift a finger to stop her, didn't even glance my way. That was somehow worse than Sarah's fury, the indifference of a man who had called me family. I bent slowly, gathering what I could into the suitcase. My hands shook, but not with despair. Each photo I tucked away reminded me of who I had been before this house became a prison. Neighbors murmured offers of help, but I shook my head. Dignity was the only thing left that was still mine to control. By evening, I was carrying my life in 2 bags. I booked a weekly rental above a noodle shop on Harbor Boulevard. The room was dim, the wallpaper peeling, but the lock clicked behind me with a finality that brought strange relief. I sat by the small window, looking past the rooftops toward the faint outline of the Channel Islands. The ocean air reached even there, thin and salt-heavy, brushing my face as I leaned against the glass. Anger pressed in, but it didn't burn. It hardened, settling into clarity. And clarity became resolve when the phone rang the next morning. The phone rang in the cramped studio just after sunrise. I hesitated before answering, half expecting another call from Sarah. Instead, the voice was calm, deliberate. "Mrs. Carver, this is James Neary. I knew the name my late husband's old friend, once a respected attorney in Ventura. He explained he had been asked to review a lottery claim flagged for dispute. Your name is signed clearly on the back. Under California law, that alone makes it yours. No one else can claim it. Regardless of where it was found." The words steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. For years I had followed Roberto's habit of signing every ticket. And now that ritual was my protection. Not long after I hung up, the calls began. Sarah's number flashed across my phone again and again. When I finally answered, her voice was syrupy, as though nothing had happened. "Mom, let's talk. We all got carried away, but we can fix this. Just come with us to the lottery office and sign a few things." Adrian's voice slipped in next, his tone coaxing. "It'll be simple. They just need your signature to release the money. We'll take care of the rest." I stayed silent, and the pause stretched until Sarah's voice cracked. "If you don't cooperate, we'll make this ugly. People will believe us over you." I asked one question. "When did you first see my name on the ticket?" There was a beat too long. Then Sarah muttered, "The first day." She tried to correct herself, but it was too late. The truth had already broken free, and with it, the last illusion that any of this was misunderstanding. I ended the call knowing the time for silence was over. I told them to meet me at the studio on Harbor Boulevard. The stairs creaked under their weight as they climbed, and when the door opened, Sarah's face twisted with disdain at the cramped space. Adrian lingered behind her, his shoulders slumped, eyes darting around as if looking for escape routes. I gestured for them to sit. The single chair went to Sarah. Adrian leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I placed the folder on the table between us. "I've already filed the claim," I said. "The winnings are secured in my name." Sarah's lips curled. "So this is what it's about. You're going to hold it over us, aren't you?" I ignored her tone. "Here are my terms. I will pay down your immediate debts for Lena's sake, not yours. But only if you put in writing a full apology for the eviction and the lies about the ticket, Adrian. You will disclose every debt, every card, every loan. And from this day forward, you will respect my boundaries. No requests for money, no moving back into my house, no more pretending I owe you my life." Adrian's face crumpled. He rubbed his hands together, voice cracking. "I was a coward. I know it. I let her push me. I let it happen. I thought keeping quiet was easier than standing up. But it wasn't. I was afraid of failing, afraid of admitting we had nothing. Sarah shot him a glare sharp enough to cut. "This is blackmail," she spat. "You're manipulating us because you got lucky. That money was meant for us." I leaned forward, steady and unshaken. "It is my money, my name, my rules. You can call it whatever you want. But these are the only terms on the table." Adrian lowered his head. Sarah's fury filled the room, but I held my ground, certain now that the balance had shifted forever. And when they left, silence heavier than words trailed behind them, making space for what would come next. It did not take long for the illusion to collapse. Realtors who had entertained Sarah's grand plans suddenly stopped returning her calls. Lenders who once promised lines of credit now laughed at the mention of her name. The cars she and Adrian had spoken of remained on showroom floors, untouched. Word traveled quickly along Hemlock Street, and neighbors who had watched me carry suitcases into a taxi now whispered about the couple who claimed fortune, but delivered only spectacle. Then came the announcement. The California Lottery Office issued the winner's name publicly, as state law required Ione Carver, Ventura. My phone lit up with calls from reporters, distant relatives, even people I hadn't heard from in decades. The whispers shifted overnight. The story was no longer about the daughter and son-in-law who struck it rich, but the mother who had endured in silence and held proof in ink. Sarah disappeared behind drawn curtains, avoiding the street where she had once paraded her imagined wealth. Adrian left the house altogether, taking a small rental near Ventura College. When he called me, his voice carried no bravado, only a weary acceptance. "I'm trying to start over," he said. I told him that was a good place to begin. One afternoon, I passed the bicycle shop on Thompson Boulevard. The same sky-blue frame still glinted in the window, though now it bore a sticker for clearance. I stepped inside and paid for it without hesitation. The clerk wheeled it out to my car, and as I tied it down, I imagined Lena's face when she finally saw the gift she had once been denied. The bicycle waited in my studio, a promise to be delivered when the dust of betrayal had finally settled into clarity. Within months, I signed papers on a small cottage near Pierpont. The place was modest, its paint sun-bleached and its garden wild, but when I unlocked the door, I felt the space breathe with possibility. The ocean was a few streets away, close enough that I could hear waves breaking at night. Steady as a heartbeat, with the winnings secure, I chose carefully where they would go. I funded a reading corner at the EAP, Foster Library in Ventura, shelves lined with children's books and soft chairs where families could sit together. For Lena, I set up a trust strict, protective, something that would carry her toward education, without ever being touched by her parents' debts or whims. Adrian began visiting, bringing Lena on weekends. He was quieter now, stripped of his old swagger, but he carried groceries when he came, and once, unprompted, he fixed a loose shutter on the porch. Sarah never appeared. Instead, a stiff letter arrived, unsigned except for her name scrawled at the bottom. The words cold but careful. One bright afternoon, I stood on the path near the sand, watching Lena ride the sky-blue bicycle along the beach. Her laughter carried over the surf, the same joy I had imagined when I first set eyes on the bike. Around my neck, I wore the cottage's key on a chain. I touched it lightly, not as a burden, but as proof that at last the door before me opened to no one's will but mine.